쉬어갈 수는 있어도 멈출 수는 없다. 자, The Catcher in the Rye. 짬날 때마다 읽기 또 읽어갑니다. Chapter 24. Mr. and Mrs. Antolini had this very swanky apartment over a certain place, with two steps that you go down to get in the living room, and a bar and all. I'd been there quite a few times, because after I left Elton Hills, Mr. Antolini came up to our house for dinner quite frequently to find out how I was getting along. He wasn't married then. Then, when he got married, I used to play tennis with he and Mrs. Antolini quite frequently, out at the West Side Tennis Club in Forest Hills, Long Island. Mrs. Antolini belonged there. She was large with a dough. She was about 60 years older than Mr. Antolini, but they seemed to get along quite well. For one thing, they were both very intellectual, especially Mr. Antolini, except that he was more witty than intellectual when you were with him, sort of like DB. Mrs. Antolini was mostly serious. She had asthma. She had asthma pretty bad. They both read all Davis stories. Mrs. Antolini too. And when DB went to Hollywood, Mr. Antolini phoned him up and told him not to go. He went anyway, though. Mr. Antolini said that anybody that could ride like DB had no business going out to Hollywood. That's exactly what I said, practically. I would have walked down to their house because I didn't want to spend any of Phoebe's Christmas dough that I didn't have to. But I felt funny when I got outside, sort of dizzy, so I took a cab. I didn't want to, but I did. I had a hell of a time even finding a cab. Old Mr. Antolini answered the door when I rang the bell. After the elevator boy finally let me up, the bastard. He had on his bathrobe and slippers, and he had a highball in one hand. He was a pretty sophisticated guy, and he was a pretty heavy drinker. Hold on, my boy, he said. My God, he's grown another 20 inches. Fine to see you. How are you, Mr. Antolini? How's Mrs. Antolini? We are both just a dandy. Let's have that coat. He took my coat off me and hung it up. I expected to see a day-old infant in your arms. Nowhere to turn. Snowflakes in your eyelashes. He's a very witty guy sometimes. He turned around and yelled out to the kitchen. Lillian, how's the coffee coming? Lillian was Mrs. Antolini's first name. It's all ready, she yelled back. Is that Holden? Hello, Holden. Hello, Mrs. Antolini. You were always yelling when you were there. That's because the both of them were never in the same room at the same time. It was sort of funny. Sit down, Holden, Mr. Antolini said. You could tell he was a little oiled up. The room looked like they'd just had a party. Glasses were all over the place and dishes with peanuts in them. Excuse the appearance of the place, he said. We've been entertaining some buffalo friends of Mrs. Antolini's. Some buffaloes, as a matter of fact. I laughed, and Mrs. Antolini yelled something into me from the kitchen, but I couldn't hear her. What did she say? I asked Mr. Antolini. She said not to look at her when she comes in. She just arose from the sack. Have a cigarette. Are you smoking now? Thanks, I said. I took a cigarette from the box he offered me. Just once in a while, I'm a moderate smoker. I'll bet you are, he said. He gave me a light from his big lighter off the table. So, you and Pansy are no longer one? He said. He always said things that way. Sometimes it amused me a lot and sometimes it didn't. He sort of did it a little bit too much. I don't mean he wasn't witty or anything, he was. But sometimes it gets on your nerves when somebody's always saying things like, "So you and Pansy are no longer one?" DB does it too much sometimes too. What was the trouble? Mr. Antolini asked me. How do you do in English? I'll show you the door in short order if you flunk the English, you little ace composition writer. Oh, I passed the English all right. It was mostly literature, though. I only wrote about 2 compositions the whole term. I said, I flunked the oral expression, though. They had this course you had to take, oral expression, that I flunked. Why? I don't know. I didn't feel much like going into it. I was still feeling sort of dizzy or something, and I had a hell of a headache all of a sudden. I'm a moderate smoker. I'll bet you are, he said. He gave me a light from his big lighter off the table. So you and Pence are no longer one, he said. He always said things that way. Sometimes it amused me a lot, and sometimes it didn't. He sort of did it a little bit too much. I don't mean he wasn't witty or anything. He was, but sometimes it gets on your nerves when somebody's always saying things like, "So you and Pansy are no longer one." TV does it too much sometimes too. What was the trouble? Mr. Antolini asked me. How do you do how do you do in English? I'll show you the door in short order if you flunk the English, you little ace composition writer. Oh, I passed the English all right. It was mostly literature, though. I only wrote about 2 compositions the whole term. I said I flunked the oral expression, though. They had this course you had to take, oral expression, that I flunked. Why? Oh, I don't know. I didn't feel much like going into it. I was still feeling sort of dizzy or something, and I had a hell of a headache all of a sudden. I really did. But you could tell he was interested, so I told him a little bit about it. Is this course where each boy in class has to get up in class and make a speech, you know, spontaneously and all, and if the boy digresses at all, you are supposed to yell digression at him as fast as you can. It's just about to drive me crazy. I got an F in it. Why? Oh, I don't know. The digression business got on my nerves. I don't know. The trouble with me is I like it when somebody digresses. It's more interesting and all. You don't care to have somebody stick to the point when he tells you something? Oh, sure. I like somebody to stick to the point and all, but I don't like them to stick too much to the point. I don't know. I guess I don't like it when somebody sticks to the point all the time. The boys that got the best marks in oral expression were the ones that stuck to the point all the time. I admit it. But there was this one boy, Richard Kinsella. He didn't stick to the point too much, and they were always yelling digression at him. It was terrible, because in the first place, he was a very nervous guy. I mean, he was a very nervous guy, and his lips were always shaking whenever it was his time to make a speech, and you could hardly hear him if you were sitting way in the back of the room. When his lips sort of quit shaking a little bit, though, I liked his speeches better than anybody else's. He practically flunked the course, though, too. He got a D plus because they kept yelling digression at him all the time. For instance, he made his speech about his farm his father bought in Vermont. They kept yelling digression at him the whole time he was making, and his teacher, Mr. Vincent, gave him an F on gave him an F on it because he hadn't told what kind of animals and vegetables and the stuff grew on the farm and all. What he did was, Richard Kinsella, he'd started telling you all about the stuff, then all of a sudden he'd started telling you about this letter his mother got from his uncle, and how his uncle polio, and oh, when he was 42 years old, and how he wouldn't let anybody come to see him in the hospital because he didn't want anybody to see him with a brace on. It didn't have much to do with the farm, I admit it, but it was nice. It's nice when somebody tells you about their uncle, especially when they start out telling you about their father's farm and then all of a sudden got more interested in their uncle. I mean, it's dirty to keep yelling digression at him when he's all nice and excited. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I didn't feel too much like a trying either. For one thing, I had this terrific headache all of a sudden. I wish to God old Mrs. Antolini would come in with the coffee. That's something that annoyed the hell out of me. I mean, if somebody says the coffee's all ready and it isn't. Hold on. One short, faintly stuffy, pedago- pedagogical, 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 pedagogical question. Don't you think there's a time and a place for everything? Don't you think if someone starts out to tell you about his father's farm, he should stick to his guns and then get around to telling you about his uncle's brace? Or, or if his uncle's brace is such a provocative subject, shouldn't he have selected it in the first place as his subject, not the farm? I didn't feel much like thinking and answering at all. I had a headache and I felt lousy. I even had sort of a stomach ache. If you want to know the truth. Yes, I don't know. I guess he should. I guess he should have picked his uncle as a subject instead of the farm, if that interested him most. But what I mean is, lots of time you don't know what interests you most till you start talking about something that doesn't interest you most. I mean, you can't help it sometimes. What I think is you are supposed to leave somebody alone if he's at least being interested and he's getting all excited about something. I like it when somebody gets excited about something. It's a nice it's a nice. You just didn't know this teacher, Mr. Vincent. He could try drive you crazy sometimes. Him and the goddamn class. I mean, he'd keep telling you to unify and simplify all the time. Some things you just can't do. Some things you just can't do that to. I mean, you can't hardly ever simplify and unify something just because somebody wants you to. You didn't know this guy, Mr. Vincent. I mean, he was very intelligent and all, but you could tell he didn't have too much brains. Coffee, gentlemen, finally, Mrs. Antolini said. She came in carrying this tray with the coffee and the cakes and the stuff on it. Hold on, don't you even pick at me? I'm a mess. Hello, Mrs. Antolini, I said. I started to get up and all. But Mr. Antolini got hold of my jacket and pulled me back down. Old Mrs. Antolini's hair was full of those curler jobs, and she didn't have any lipstick or anything on. She didn't look too gorgeous. She looked pretty old and all. I'll leave this right here. Just to dive in, you two, she said. She put the tray down on the cigarette table, pushing all these glasses out of the way. How's your mother, Holden? She's fine, thanks. I haven't seen her too recently, but the last time, darling, if Holden needs anything, everything's in the linen closet, the top shelf. I'm going to bed. I'm exhausted, Mrs. Antolini said. She looked it too. Can you boys make up the couch by yourselves? We'll take care of everything. You run along to bed, Mr. Antolini said. He gave Mrs. Antolini a kiss and she said goodbye to me and went in the bedroom. They were always kissing each other a lot in public. I had a part of a cup of coffee and about half of some cake that was as hard as a rock. All old Mr. Antolini had was another highball, though. He makes them strong too. You could tell. He may get to be an alcoholic if he doesn't watch his step. I had lunch with your dad a couple of weeks ago. He said all of a sudden. Did you know that? No, I didn't. You're aware, of course, that he is terribly concerned about you. I know it. I know he is, I said. Apparently, before he phoned me, he'd just had a long, rather harrowing letter from your latest headmaster to the effect that you were making absolutely no effort at all. Cutting classes, coming on unprepared to all your classes in general, being on all around. I didn't cut any classes. You weren't allowed to cut any. There were a couple of them I didn't attend once in a while, like that oral expression I told you about, but I didn't cut any. I didn't feel at all like discussing it. The coffee made my stomach feel a little better, but I still had this awful headache. Mr. Antolini lit another cigarette. He smoked like a fiend. Then he said, frankly, I don't know what the hell to say to you, Holden. I know. I'm very hard to talk to. I realize that. I have a feeling that you are writing for some kind of a terrible, terrible fall, but I don't honestly know what kind. Are you listening to me? Yes. You could tell he was trying to concentrate and all. It may be the kind where, at the age of 30, you sit in some bar hating everybody who comes in looking as if that he might have played football in college. Then again, you may pick up just enough education to hate the people who say it's a secret between he and I. Or you may end up in some business office office throwing paper clips at the nearest stenographer. I just don't know. But do you know what I'm driving at all? Yes, sure. I said I did too. But you were wrong about that hating business. I mean about hating football players and all. You really are? I don't hate too many guys. What I may do, I may hate them for a little while, like this guy. Straight later, I knew at Pansy and this other boy, Robert Ackley. I hated them once in a while, I admit it, but it doesn't last too long. Is what I mean. After a while, if I didn't see them, if they didn't come in the room, or if I didn't see them in the dining room for a couple of meals, I sort of missed them. I sort of missed them. Mr. Antolini didn't say anything for a while. He got up and got another hunk of ice and put it in his drink. Then he sat down again. You could tell he was thinking. I kept wishing, though, that he'd continued the conversation in the morning instead of now, but he was hot. People are mostly hot to have a discussion when you're not. All right, listen to me a minute now. I may not word this as memorable as I'd like to, but I will write you a letter about it in a day or two. Then you can get it all straight. But listen now, anyway. He started concentrating again. Then he said, this fall, I think you're writing for, it's a special kind of fall, a horrible kind. The man falling isn't permitted to feel or hear himself hit bottom. It just keeps falling and falling. The whole arrangement is designed for men who, at some time or other in their lives, were looking for something their own environment couldn't supply them with, or they thought their own environment couldn't supply them with. So they gave up looking. They gave it up before they ever really even got started. You follow me? Yes, sir. Sure. Yes. He got up and poured some more booze in his glass. Then he sat down again. He didn't say anything for a long time. I don't want to scare you, he said, but I can very clearly see you dying nobly, one way or another, for some highly unworthy cause. He gave me a funny look. If I write something down for you, will you read it carefully and keep it? Yes, sure. I said I did it too. I still have the paper he gave me. He went over to this desk on the other side of the room and, without sitting down, wrote something on a piece of paper. Then he came back and sat down with the paper in his hand. Oddly enough, this wasn't written by a practicing poet. poet. It was written by a psychoanalyst named William Steckel. Here's what he. Are you still with me? Yeah, sure I am. Here's what he said. The mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause, while the mark of the mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. He leaned over and handed it to me. I read. I read it right when he gave it to me, and then I thanked him and all, and put it in my pocket. It was nice of him to go to all that trouble. It really was. The thing was, though, I didn't feel much like concentrating, but I felt so damn tired all of a sudden. You could tell he wasn't tired at all, though he was pretty oiled up. For one thing, I think that one of these days, he said, you're going to have to find out where you want to go, and then you've got to start going there. But immediately, you can't afford to lose a minute, not you. I nodded, because he was looking right at me and all, but I wasn't too sure what he was talking about. I was pretty sure I knew, but I wasn't too positive at the time. I was too damn tired. And I hate to tell you, he said, but I think that once you have a fair idea where you want to go, your first move will be to apply yourself in school. You will have to. You are a student, whether the idea appears to you or not. You are in love with the knowledge, and I think you will find, once you get past all the Mr. Vinesis and their order come Mr. Vincent's, I said. He meant all the Mr. Vincent's, not all the Mr. Vinesis. I shouldn't have interrupted him, though. All right, the Mr. Vincent's. Once you get past all the Mr. Vincent's, you're going to start to get closer and closer. That is, if you want to. And if you look for it and wait for it, to the kind of information that will be very, very dear to your heart. Among other things, you will find that you're not the first person who was ever confused and frightened and even sickened by human behavior. You are by no means alone on that score. You will be excited and